Hey guys, this is Anders with Atom Audio, and today we're going to be talking about acoustic clouds, what they are, what they're used for, and how to install them. So today we're joined once again by Graham of City Acoustics. We've done a couple videos with them before, so if you're interested, check it out in the description below. But for those who haven't seen, do you want to give a little backstory to what City Acoustics is and how it got started?
It really started kind of out of my need, one for acoustic treatment, and then two, to find acoustic solutions and things that worked in my studio in a house. And so I started building stuff and researching and spending a lot of time trying out different things. And so City Acoustics is kind of the culmination of all of that. And our products and the consulting and the design work that we do really kind of focused on how do you find the best and easiest solutions for home studios and the acoustic problems that they typically face.
And we actually have a surprise giveaway. Graham is going to be giving away the acoustic clouds that we'll be using today. So if you are a US resident, be sure to stick around to the end of the video to find out how to win them. So we'll start with the most basic question, which is, why are they important in a studio setting?
Clouds are super important for a few reasons, especially so in a home studio where you have like an 8-foot ceiling or a 9-foot ceiling if you're lucky. Oftentimes that's the wall or the boundary that's actually closest to you at the listening position, so you have a lot of reflections that are coming off of that. That's going to distort the frequency response of what you're hearing. It's going to cause issues with your stereo image, so things aren't going to be as pinpoint accurate left to right as you might like. And then one of the biggest things that you can accomplish with the cloud is improving your low frequency response in the room. And the ceiling's not normally the area that people think to fix that. You hear a lot about like corners and putting bass traps in all the corners in your rooms and in the soffits and that kind of thing. But the cloud is what's really going to give you the ability to control your floor to ceiling mode. And in an 8-foot room, that's gonna be like 140 hertz. And in a 9-foot room, height-wise, it's gonna be 125 hertz. And it creates this huge bump in your frequency response of those frequencies, and that's like right where acoustic guitars live, the low end of the vocal range, kick drums, bass guitars, electric guitars, pianos. If you're trying to mix all that and you just have this huge push of amplitude at those frequencies, it's really hard to make out, hey, is this a resonance in my guitar? Or is this the room distorting things and making me think there's a resonance in there, and you're gonna do way too much EQing. So like the cloud helps your imaging, all the more common things you would think about, but when you add a deeper cloud, something like 6.5 inches that can work lower into the frequency response, you're gonna clear up a bunch of low-end problems as well.
So like with all acoustic treatment, leave an air gap between the treatment itself and the wall. Is that the same with clouds, and how much of an air gap should you leave?
So that really does apply to really any acoustic treatment. And the reason for it being is that as you come off the wall, there's more velocity in the air particles. And the way that most acoustic panels work is by absorbing energy as it's moving through the air. And so the biggest thing you're doing is just putting the panel in a better place to work. And so with the ceiling, typically you wanna match the depth of the panel. So if you have like a 6-inch panel, you want a 6-inch air gap. If you have a 4-inch panel, you're gonna want a 4-inch air gap. There's a few reasons for that, but the main one is that as you increase your air gap and make it too big in relation to the depth of your panel, you're gonna start to cause some negative effects in how well it's absorbing higher up in the frequency response. And so that's an area where you really optimize the improvement that you get, or the improvement in the performance, without causing any new problems.
So let's say someone is in an apartment or something like that where they can't hang heavy acoustic panels on the ceilings themselves. What would you suggest in that scenario that someone could do to kind of alleviate some of the issues that might come along with not having an acoustic cloud?
Yeah, not being able to install clouds is always gonna leave you with some challenges, but every room's gonna have its own unique challenges and issues, and we're pretty good at adapting to those. One possible option is to put treatment on the floor. It's not the most common thing, but your floor and your ceiling are both contributing to those issues. So what a cloud is doing could also be, for the most part, done on the floor as well, but obviously that presents some limitations. It's like you're not gonna be walking on your treatment, and where can you actually put it and get around? But if your desk is there and you have the space, that's a pretty good option when you can't put anything on the ceiling. If you have the ability, and if you're looking for a new apartment, it's a good thing to take into consideration. The higher the ceiling, the less this is certain things within a cloud are gonna be an issue, at least. And so, if you can get a vaulted ceiling or something higher up to where it's not gonna be as critical, or it's not gonna be the first thing that you might wanna do, that kind of thing, that can be an approach, but not everybody has the option to do so.
So today we're not only gonna be talking about the benefits of acoustic clouds, but we're actually gonna be showing you guys how to hang them properly and safely, and how to get the best performance out of them. So to start out, what tools will we need for today's install?
So you won't need too many tools. A tape measure, a pencil, a marker, a stud finder. If you don't have a stud finder, you can drill a few holes in the ceiling or knock on it to locate all the studs and find where they are. A few different drill bits, 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch, along with a drill, and then a flathead screwdriver, a step stool or ladder, and a friend.
So you've also put together an install guide that you can follow along with. You can find that as well in the description below. So you can watch the video and read the guidelines to install your own panels. So we've got the space cleared out pretty well, and we're ready to get started.
First thing we got to do before you start actually installing anything is going to be figuring out where it's going to go. You know, typically like in a control room setting, your clouds are going to be centered in the room because that's your listening position centered in the room. And then your distance from the front wall is going to be based off of where your listening position is and where your monitors are. So we'll use this room as an example. While it's not exactly set up as a studio or a mixing situation, we're going to have the cloud centered in the room, and then we'll install it as if our listening position is like 5 feet from the front wall. And then you got to figure out the length and the width of your room, so that you can figure out where the center of your room is. From there, step 2 is gonna be figuring out where are the studs in the ceiling. And that's always kind of the mystery going into it, is like, are they gonna be running, you know, perpendicular to your cloud or parallel? And that'll affect where our hardware goes and kind of how the whole thing comes together. So this ceiling is a little unique because it's plaster, so we're in an older house. Stud finders don't work. You can't knock on it because it's like concrete and wood. So in this case, we're actually going to drill holes in the ceiling. When we hit a stud, then we can then based off of that, know that they're probably about 16 inches apart, kind of typical stud spacing. And so from there, we should be able to measure and then not have to drill quite so many holes, but basically using a little drill bit and a lot of patience, we'll drill some holes and figure out where they are. Took a few tries, but we ended up finding a stud. And so now that we found one, we can go ahead and drill a hole. Typically I'll go 16 inches away from the hole that we found a stud on, to follow typical stud spacing. And that will help us figure out if the studs are oriented front to back like we were talking about, or left to right. After finding your second stud, make sure that you've got both of those marked on the ceiling. And then you can go ahead and use that measurement to try and find a third one. That will help you confirm which way your studs are running, and then also give you a pretty good sense of where your cloud's gonna go and where those studs are gonna intersect with it. So with the 3 studs that we found, we're gonna go ahead and measure their distance from one of the side walls, since they're running front to back, so that we can add them into our drawing. That'll let us see where they are in the room and then where they're gonna intersect with our cloud, so that we can get all the hardware installed in both the cloud and the ceiling and make sure everything lines up. Definitely when we're working on a cloud install, make sure that you measure several times so that when you go to hang it and you're lifting that big heavy thing with your friend, that you don't have to do it a couple times. So I'm gonna take those measurements that we got from the stud locations and just draw them into our sketch really roughly, so that I can see where the studs are in the room and where those are going to intersect, both with the listening position that we already have in here, and then as we draw in the cloud, we'll be able to see where this all kind of comes together. With the cloud and our studs all put into our sketch, we're ready to go ahead and assemble the cloud so that we can figure out where all the hardware is gonna go. We're gonna go ahead and lay down these panels on the ground so we can get the cloud assembled. Before you jump into that, you might wanna put some plastic or something clean down on the ground to make sure nothing happens to the fabric. So let's get this thing put together. We're building this cloud out of our 4-foot by 2-foot base strap panels, which are 6.5 inches deep. They come in a bunch of different colors. This is the Guilford of Maine Asteroid gray color. All of our panels this year are now made with Guilford of Maine fabric, which we're pretty stoked about. So when we put clouds together, it's gonna be made up typically of like, normally we'll use 3 panels. It's a good size for most studios or most like smaller home studios. We'll lay them out. They all get screwed into these backing boards, 1x4s. And typically there's a space of like a gap of 2 inches between the panels, which is how you get the 6'4" width. You don't have to be too careful when you're lining them up at first. When we screw them together, you're gonna screw the outside panels to the boards first so that you can get the spacing right on the middle panel and make sure everything's lined up really well. In this room, the studs are running perpendicular to the boards that we're putting on our cloud. So our studs are running this way in the room, and our boards, these 1x4s, are running perpendicular to that. If you're in a room where your studs are running parallel to these boards, where your boards go on your cloud or on your panels is gonna be dependent upon the studs so that you can make sure those line up. That's all covered pretty well in the PDF that you can download and follow along with. In this case, because the studs are perpendicular, the placement of these boards isn't super critical. So we're gonna put these boards 6 inches from the edge of the panel on the front and the back. If you don't wanna see the hardware at all, you may want to take your boards and put them a little further into the panel. Just make sure that you're not getting too close to the center so that your weight stays distributed pretty evenly. To line up the board, we're gonna make a mark on the back of each panel using that 6-inch mark that we talked about on the panels, and then when we put the board down, we'll be able to line it up with the mark on all of our panels. We'll do this on both the front and the back of all the panels. Now that you've got your panels all marked, you can go ahead and line up the board with your marks on each panel and start pre-drilling holes for the screws that are going to go into the boards to secure them to the panels. So if you're following along in the install guide, this is where you're going to use the 1/8 inch drill bit. And as you're lining up this board here, make sure that it's lined up on both marks on your first panel. And then what we'd recommend doing is putting in 1 screw on the outside edge. So the reason for starting with just 1 screw is that it's going to allow you to pivot that board a little bit. So we're going to hop over to the other side of our cloud, get the outside edge of that secured, and then we'll come back and do all of the inner screws and inner sides of our panels so we can make sure everything stays nice and straight and consistent throughout this process. After we have both outside edges of the panel screwed in with 1 screw, we'll come back and do the outer panels, but on the inside edge this time. So we're going to do the same thing for the other outer panel here. And if you see, it's off of this mark a little bit right now, and this is our 6-inch mark where we want the edge of this board to line up with our panel. And so that's the reason when you start on your outer sides of the panel, you only want to put 1 screw in, because this way we can come over here and pivot it back and make sure that it's lined up on our with our mark on both the outer edge of the panel and the inner edge of the panel. And from here, as we're going through now, we can start to put 2 screws in everywhere. Our 1x4 board was pre-cut to length at 6 feet 4 inches. This is just kind of a normal 1x4. That will leave you with a 2-inch gap between each of your panels. So before you go ahead and screw the center panel down to the cloud, make sure that you have your spacing even. So with the first side done, we'll go ahead and repeat the process for the second side, and then we'll be ready to put the hardware on the cloud. Attaching the second board to the cloud is the exact same process. It's just a little bit easier now because everything should be lined up pretty well. With the cloud assembled, we're ready to figure out where our eye screws are going to go. In order to do that, we need to know where the center of the cloud is going to be in the room and where those studs are going to be. That'll tell us where the intersection of the cloud and the studs are. In this case, our cloud is going to be 72 inches from the sidewall because the room's 12 feet wide. Our first stud that we're going to be using is 100 inches from that wall. So if we know that this stud is 100 inches from that wall and we want the center of our cloud to be at 72 inches from the right wall, we're going to subtract those 2 numbers, and that will give us the spacing from the center of the cloud to where the eye screw is going to go. So in this case, we're going to take 100 and subtract 72, and that'll give us 28 inches. So now we can mark from the center of the cloud over 28 inches. At this point is where the stud that's running through the ceiling is going to intersect with the cloud. Then we'll just repeat the process for the second stud that we're going to use. In this case, that stud is 52.5 inches from the right wall. So we'll subtract the center position, which is 72 inches. So we'll take the 72 minus 52.5, which gives us 19.5 inches. And again, that will be the distance from the center of the cloud over. So we'll mark that out. So those 2 locations are where we're going to put the eye screws on our cloud. The eye screws are going to go in the center of our 1x4 board here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark the center position, which in this case is 1 3/4 inches from the edge of this board. So now we'll know exactly where to pre-drill our holes, and then just repeat the exact same process for the second board. But this time you don't have to do any math because we've already done it. Now that we've got all of our eye screw locations marked out, we'll go ahead and pre-drill those holes, and then we'll get those screwed in so we can figure out where our hardware on the ceiling is going to go from there. So you're putting in the eye screws, get them started by hand, and then it can be helpful to finish tightening them with a screwdriver so you can make sure they get all the way in there. Give you a little extra push. One other helpful tip when you're doing this is make sure that your eye screws are installed parallel to the boards that you put up. When you go to actually hanging the cloud, that'll make getting the hardware that we'll have on the ceiling much easier to hook onto the eye screws on the panel. With the cloud fully assembled and ready to go, the last step before we can start working on the ceiling is to figure out where the ceiling hardware actually has to go. And that's gonna be based off of where these eye screws are here on the cloud. So to figure that out, we need to know the distance from the front wall to the front edge of our cloud, which in this example is 1 foot. And then we're gonna take that foot and add it to the distance from the front edge of the panel to our eye screws. This first eye screw is 7 3/4 inches from the front edge of the panel. So we're gonna take 1 foot plus 7 3/4, and that'll give us the distance from the front wall that we're gonna wanna drill into the stud and put our hardware in. And then we'll repeat the process for the second eye screw back here. So this one is 40 1/4 inches from the front edge of the panel. So again, we'll take 1 foot, the distance from the front wall to the front edge of our panel, and then add the distance from the front edge of the panel to our eye screw. And that will tell us where to drill for the second set of hardware into our studs on the ceiling. With the measurements squared away for our ceiling hardware, we'll go ahead and mark all of their locations and drill the holes. So before we actually drill any of the holes, now that we've got the ceiling marked for all the hardware locations, I'm gonna measure them from mark to make sure that it lines up with what we actually have on the cloud. So if there are any errors or mistakes that we've made in this process so far, that we can catch them before we start putting holes in the ceiling. With everything marked and double checked, we're gonna go ahead and drill the holes in the ceiling. So if the studs don't stay perfectly straight or parallel to the walls in your room, sometimes you might miss just by a hair, like we just had happen. If you're really close to where the stud is, that's not gonna be the end of the world. The hardware's got a little bit of give in it, and when we start to actually level it out, you can adjust it with the turnbuckles. So in this case, we won't have to move anything on the cloud. I'll just kind of adjust here with the turnbuckles and make sure everything's level once we get the cloud up. With all of our holes drilled into the studs, we're ready to go ahead and put the hooks in. So same thing as when we were putting in those eye screws into the actual cloud. Once this starts to thread pretty well into the stud, it's gonna get very hard to twist. So using a screwdriver or something to give you a little extra leverage to twist it and drive it up into the studs is gonna be really helpful. When we're installing clouds, we use these turnbuckles. They make it super easy to level the cloud once it's been installed, and if you want it angled or if you want it flat, you can really accomplish all of that once it's already up and in place. And the best way to use these is to open them up a little bit so that way you can tighten them or you can drop them down, and that'll give you the most control over how your cloud's gonna hang once it's up. So the last step before actually putting the cloud up is gonna be to put the turnbuckles up on our hooks. And when you're doing this, you wanna make sure that the hook is facing outwards. That will make getting the cloud and getting everything locked into place way easier. So that way when you're picking up that big heavy cloud, these things will kind of slide into place as opposed to having to really fight and search for it. With all of our hardware in place, we're gonna go ahead and pick up the cloud and get it on the first set of hooks, and then we'll swing it up towards the second hooks. And when you're doing this, just make sure you have your space kind of laid out well, where you don't have anything in your way. If you've got your monitors or anything that are in the room, it's probably a good time, if you haven't already, to take those out, put them in a safer spot, move the desk if you need to. The cloud's gonna be heavy, so make sure that you have everything laid out, so once you pick it up, you're ready to go, and you can get it installed without having to set it back down and pick it back up again. So once you've got your cloud up and installed, the hard part's definitely over. So the last step here would be just to level it out. Right now, looking at it, we've got a little bit of a drop here on the right side of it, and that we're gonna be able to fix just by using those turnbuckles to adjust things a little bit here and there. And then like I was saying, if you wanted to angle it, to where the back of the cloud is a little bit higher up, you can use those turnbuckles, pull the back ones up higher, drop the front ones. You can really do whatever you want with them.
So thank you guys for watching. Graham, thank you again for doing this video with us, man. We hope you guys find it really insightful when you're installing clouds in your studio. And again, if you want to win this exact set of clouds, you can by entering in the link below. You just got to sign up for the Music City Acoustics newsletter as well as the Atom Audio newsletter. If people want to find out more about the products we used and everything else, where can they go?
They can check out our website. It's got all of our products on there. We've also got hardware kits, like a cloud hardware kit like we use today, available in our accessory store. And then we've got a bunch of info and like the install guides. And if you've got any questions about how to do it, just reach out to us and send us an email.
And if you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.
You just want the good news or the bad news?
Bad news.
Well, I didn't do this correctly. So with all of our hard So it took a few tries, but we found our first stud here. Holy shit, that's hot. Don't do that. Yeah, I just want to like reiterate that don't let this thing fall on your head and blame us.